The night was thick with rain, a relentless drum on the taxi's roof. Inside, Naomi Rivers clutched her purse, knuckles white, eyes scanning the neon-lit streets of downtown Chicago. Her shift had ended hours ago, yet exhaustion wasn't her heaviest burden. Fear was. The cruiser lights cut through the rain like surgical knives. "Taxi 7, pull over," a gruff voice ordered. The driver muttered under his breath, but the car obeyed. Naomi's stomach clenched. She'd seen this pattern too many times. Black driver, black passenger. The presumption of guilt before a word was spoken. The officer approached, slick rain sliding down his uniform. His gaze lingered, dismissive, suspicious. "License and registration." "Now." Naomi fumbled with her purse. The officer's eyes sharp, predatory. "You drive late? Odd hours for a woman like you," he said, a knife of accusation hidden in civility. She froze, heartbeat loud enough to echo in her ears. Words tangled in her throat. The taxi driver shifted uncomfortably, a quiet witness. "You think you can pull this over me?" The officer spat, stepping closer, breath hot, menace thick. Naomi swallowed hard, steadying herself, realizing every small gesture, the glance at her hands, her posture, her calm voice was being weighed, judged. Then a hand slammed on the hood of the taxi. His voice dropped a sneer. "I could have you off the streets tonight if I wanted." Naomi's eyes met his, and in that split second, she understood. This was about power, about fear, about control. And she wasn't ready to let him have it. A siren wailed in the distance. One wrong move, one misread glance, and her world could end. The rain hammered the taxi roof, relentless and cold, rattling Naomi Rivers' nerves in time with her heartbeat. Her hands rested lightly on her purse, fingertips gripping the strap, eyes flicking between the slick, neon-lit streets of downtown Chicago and the shadows beyond the windshield. She had been driving late-night shift for years, but tonight felt different, heavier, an undercurrent of threat she couldn't name. A sudden flash of red and blue split the darkness, sharp and insistent. Naomi stiffened. The driver muttered something under his breath. "Great, just great," he said, barely audible over the rain. "Taxi 7, pull over." The voice came, clipped and final. Authority wrapped in impatience. Naomi's stomach tightened. She had felt this before. The assumption of guilt, the presumption of danger. She breathed in slowly, trying to steady herself, and nodded slightly to the driver. The taxi slowed, tires skimming puddles along the slick curb. Naomi's hands tightened on her purse. One misstep, one moment too slow, and this could turn into something worse. The cruiser door opened with a metallic clang. Officer Daniels approached, tall, broad, uniform heavy with authority. Rain dripped off his shoulders, slicking the edge of his hat, and his eyes fixed on Naomi with an unsettling intensity. "License and registration." "Now," he said, tone firm, threaded with suspicion. Naomi fumbled with her purse, pulling out her ID and the taxi's papers. Each movement felt deliberate under his gaze. He glanced at her hands, then her posture, then back to her face, as if reading her soul. "You drive late? Odd hours for a woman like you," he said casually, but the accusation cut sharper than any knife. Naomi's lips pressed together. She let calm anchor her, though her chest tightened. "I work shifts." "Night work isn't unusual for me," she replied evenly. Her voice was clear, steady, unyielding. Daniels leaned closer, wet rain sliding down the brim of his hat. "You think you can pull this over me?" The words were venom wrapped in civility. His hand slammed briefly on the hood of the taxi, a warning. The driver shifted uneasily, silent, tense. Naomi could feel the cab vibrating beneath her, the heat of fear mingling with the wet chill of the rain. She held her gaze on Daniels, refusing to shrink, refusing to give him the satisfaction. "Everything okay here?" A pedestrian called from the sidewalk, voice wary. Daniels ignored them, focused entirely on Naomi, as if she alone carried the weight of suspicion. She noticed the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth, the way he flexed his fingers, impatient. "Ma'am, I said license and registration," he repeated, sharper this time. "Right here," Naomi said, sliding the documents across to him. Her hands didn't shake, but inside, Her chest tightened with each passing second. Daniels glanced at the ID, then at the papers, then back at her, as if deciding whether her calmness was defiance or deceit. "I could have you off the streets tonight if I wanted," he said, voice low, heavy with menace. Naomi swallowed. One moment stretched between them, taut and sharp as a wire. She could almost hear the city itself holding its breath, the wail of distant sirens echoing in the wet silence. Her hand tightened on her purse, knuckles white. She refused to let fear show, refused to shrink from his gaze. "Sir, I'm simply following the rules," she said softly but firmly, eyes never leaving his. Her voice carried authority despite the circumstances, a quiet resistance against power wielded carelessly. He huffed, exhaling sharply through his nose. "You think rules mean the same for everyone?" Daniels muttered, stepping back slightly, but the menace in his eyes didn't fade. Naomi's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She wanted to speak, to remind him that the city didn't belong to him alone, that the assumption of power didn't give him the right to intimidate. She swallowed again. One wrong word, one twitch of her hand, and it could all turn arrest, citation, escalation. The rain sluiced down, running in rivulets off the windshield. She could smell the metallic tang of it, taste it in the damp air. Her mind raced, cataloging every micro-gesture, every nuance, memorizing the moment. She was a witness to the injustice as much as the target. And then, in a single piercing second, everything froze. The threat in his words, the weight of his authority, the cold, wet city around them. And Naomi understood this wasn't personal. It was systemic. Every look, every word, every action was a lesson in control, in fear, in dominance. And yet, she would not break. Not tonight. Not ever. The taxi pulled into the underground lot with a hiss of wet tires, the rain still drumming against the roof. Naomi sat in silence for a moment after the officer had left, watching the red and blue reflections fade across the wet concrete. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, knuckles white, pulse still hammering. She drew in a slow breath, exhaling in a long, deliberate rhythm. "Damn, Naomi," the driver muttered, breaking the silence. That was rough." Naomi kept her eyes forward, voice measured. "Yeah, it's not the first time, and it won't be the last. But I didn't give him anything to use." He shook his head. "Still, that threat, right there? My God, I thought—" His words trailed off, but Naomi knew what he was thinking. One wrong move, one twitch, and he could call an arrest, no questions asked. "You okay?" he asked, cautious now, more friend than driver. Naomi swallowed, nodding slightly. "I'm fine. Frustrated, but fine. You know how it is, black woman, alone in a cab at night. You become a target, whether you like it or not." Her words hung in the damp air. She reached for her purse, closing it as if sealing away the tension inside. Her mind replayed every detail. The way Daniels had leaned too close, the way his eyes scanned her like she was guilty before a word had been spoken, the subtle jab about odd hours for a woman like you. "Odd hours for a woman like you," she muttered under her breath, letting the phrase roll around, sharp as glass. She remembered the thrum of authority, the way he had slammed his hand on the hood, his way of saying, "I own this space. I decide your fear." Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from Marcus. "You okay?" Heard about to stop. "Call me." Naomi typed quickly. "Yeah, worst night ever. Call when you can." Minutes later, Marcus' voice came over the line, a warm anchor. "Naomi, talk to me. What happened?" She let the story spill, detailing the stop, the officer's words, the threat, keeping her voice steady but letting the undercurrent of anger and fatigue leak through. "I can't believe they still pull this crap," Marcus said, disbelief and frustration mixing in his tone. "Every night it's the same. You, me, anyone who doesn't fit their idea of normal." Naomi nodded, though he couldn't see it. "I know, and it's exhausting. I thought about reporting it formally this time, but you know how it goes. Internal affairs, bureaucrats, red tape. You tell the truth, and they twist it, or they dismiss it, or worse, they protect the guy doing the harassment." Marcus laughed bitterly. "Yeah, I've seen it. You ever feel like the system is designed to let them get away with this? Exactly, she said, voice low, resolute. I keep thinking about all the women I know who've had to nod, smile, or shut up just to get home safely. It's like every night is a test of patience and composure. And we pass it, over and over. But what do we get in return? Silence settled briefly on the line. Then Marcus asked cautiously, "Are you angry?" Naomi exhaled slowly, thinking about the adrenaline, the fear, the frustration. Yeah, angry, but also tired. Tired of explaining myself, tired of surviving, tired of being a target just for existing. Her voice faltered for the first time. I don't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break down, but it's hard. It's so damn hard. Naomi, Marcus said, firm but gentle, you didn't break. You held it together. That counts for something. She nodded again, though he couldn't see her. I know, but it's not enough. Holding it together doesn't change the fact that he thinks he has the power to intimidate me because of my skin. That's the part that gnaws at me. The assumption of dominance. The presumption of guilt. That's what needs to change. The taxi engine idled, quiet now. Naomi's eyes drifted to the wet concrete below, the reflections of neon signs distorted and smeared by rainwater. She thought about the city outside, busy, vibrant, dangerous in ways no one acknowledged until it touched them personally. I might report it, she said finally, almost to herself. Not just for me, but for the pattern. Someone has to notice that these officers can't just keep doing this. Someone has to make sure they can't hide behind rules and uniforms. Marcus' voice softened. If anyone can push for that, it's you. You've got the brains, the courage, and the patience to navigate it without letting them crush you. Naomi smiled faintly. Thanks. I need that reminder tonight. It's easy to forget who I am when someone else tries to define it for me. They talked for a few more minutes, lighter topics creeping in, yet the tension from the stop lingered like a shadow. Naomi hung up, watching the taxi driver step out, umbrella raised, shaking his head at the rain. She leaned back, closed her eyes briefly, and let herself feel the weight she had carried silently for so long. Fear, anger, fatigue, all pooled in her chest. And yet, beneath it, a simmering determination. She would not be defined by fear. She would not allow power wielded carelessly to dominate her life. Somehow, she knew this night was only the beginning. The threat, the injustice, the system itself, they would all come to a head soon. And when they did, she intended to face them with every ounce of strength she had. The city hummed around her, rain still falling, lights flickering. Naomi gripped her purse, a small anchor in the storm. She had survived the night, and she would survive what came next. Naomi walked into the Department of Transportation office the next morning, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. The smell of industrial carpet and faint coffee lingered in the air, but it couldn't mask the tension knotting her stomach. She had spent the night replaying Daniel's words, the weight of the threat pressing against her chest. And now she had to confront bureaucracy, the institutional wall she knew would be just as unyielding. She approached the front desk. "Good morning. I'd like to file a complaint," she said, voice steady but firm. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a forced smile, glanced up. "Of course. Name, Naomi Rivers, taxi driver. Last night, I was pulled over Officer Daniels." She watched the clerk scribble on a form with a deliberate, slow efficiency that felt like it existed to frustrate her. "Details," the clerk prompted. Naomi took a deep breath. He issued vague threats, questioned me about why I was driving late, and implied I could be removed from the streets just for existing. It felt targeted, racially targeted. The clerk paused, looking up like she wasn't sure how to respond. "I see. Internal Affairs will review it. Standard procedure." Naomi forced a polite nod, masking her rising frustration. Standard procedure, she thought, which usually means ignore it. Moments later, she was led to a small office, carpet faded, walls adorned with outdated posters about ethics and community service. Sitting across from her was Lieutenant Harper, a man in his 50s with graying hair and a tight-lipped expression. "Ms. Rivers," he began, voice clipped. "Officer Daniels submitted a report regarding your encounter last night." Apparently, you were uncooperative. Naomi blinked. Uncooperative? I answered his questions. I provided all requested documentation. I complied completely. He shuffled papers, eyes scanning quickly, then met hers with a faint smirk. That's what he says. He's a respected officer. You can understand that we weigh his account heavily. Naomi's chest tightened. Respectable? Threatening me. Insinuating I could be removed from the streets because I'm a black woman. Is that the standard you're using for respectability? Lieutenant Harper leaned back, arms crossed. We investigate all claims. Now, can you recount what happened? She did, recounting every word, every gesture, the hand slammed on the hood, the insinuations, the subtle intimidation, his eyes scanning her like prey. She included the pedestrian who had glanced nervously, the driver's unease, the rain-slicked streets, and the officer's behavior. Did he touch you? Harper asked. No, she said firmly. He threatened me verbally. He created fear. That is harassment. He tapped his pen against the desk. HM will take it under advisement. Internal Affairs will review the statements. Sometimes these situations are subjective, perceptions versus reality. Naomi's jaw tightened. Subjective? Fear isn't subjective. She forced herself to nod. Of course. I just want the truth documented. Harper leaned forward slightly. I'm sure you do. But I must warn you, these complaints can take weeks, months, sometimes longer. Officer Daniels is a long-tenure member of the force. Standard procedure may not yield immediate consequences. Naomi's hands curled into fists in her lap. She could feel the frustration building, a familiar mix of anger and exhaustion. Understood, but I will ensure this is on record. Every word, because this pattern isn't new, and ignoring it only reinforces it. Harper's face betrayed a flicker of surprise. You're quite assertive. I've had to be, Naomi said softly, her gaze unwavering. Being assertive is often the only shield we have when power is wielded unjustly, especially when that power assumes you are less than human. He coughed lightly, shuffling papers again, a slight shift in posture acknowledging her resolve without conceding anything. We'll follow the proper channels. Document everything. Naomi left the office with a sense of both relief and lingering unease. The system would move slowly, if at all. Bureaucracy had a way of protecting its own, but she refused to let inaction define her response. Outside, the city was waking, the streets glistening from overnight rain. Neon reflections had dimmed, replaced by the pale glow of streetlights and the rumble of early traffic. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, inhaling the cold air. Her phone buzzed again. Marcus. Any luck? She typed quickly, filed a complaint. Harper was polite, but predictable. I won't let it end there. Minutes later, he replied, Good. Keep me posted. You're handling it better than most would. That officer won't see it coming if you follow through. Naomi exhaled, walking toward the parking lot where her taxi waited. Each step felt heavier than the last, but with every step, determination grew. She had survived the threat. She had survived the stop. And now, she would survive the system too. She thought about the layers of power she had just encountered. The casual dismissal by the clerk, the thinly veiled skepticism from Harper, the authority Daniels wielded like a weapon. All of it was predictable. But Naomi had her own weapons, knowledge, strategy, and unshakable composure. As she slid into the taxi and started the engine, she glanced at the rearview mirror, seeing the faint reflection of the city stretching endlessly behind her. Somewhere in those streets, Daniels and officers like him assumed control, assumed dominance. Naomi gritted her teeth. They haven't met me yet. She started the car, rain beginning to mist over the windshield once more, and drove into the slowly brightening morning, a storm of resolve growing inside her. The investigation had begun, but this time she would control the narrative. The council chamber smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. Naomi Rivers sat in the back row, hands folded neatly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the dais where city officials whispered among themselves. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the dull monotony broken only by the occasional cough or scrape of a chair. Outside, The morning sun reflected off wet streets, but inside, the atmosphere was dense, charged. She had arrived early, under the guise of attending a routine transportation license hearing. Few noticed her, but she noticed them, the officers sitting stiffly at the side, including Daniels, unaware that she held authority over every license discussed here. The thought tightened her chest with anticipation. Next on the agenda, taxi licensing review, the chairwoman announced, tapping the gavel lightly. Murmurs swept through the room as officers and city employees shuffled papers. Naomi's pulse quickened. Daniels looked up briefly, eyes scanning the room, finally settling on her. He frowned. Recognition didn't register immediately, but Naomi could feel the subtle tension as his eyes narrowed, trying to place her in the official hierarchy. The room quieted as Naomi approached the microphone. Her heels clicked on the polished floor. She set her documents neatly on the podium, glanced at the council members, and then at the audience. Her voice was calm, measured, but carried authority. "Good morning," she began. "I am Naomi Rivers, Transportation Licensing Oversight. I oversee all commercial vehicle licenses in the city, including taxis." Her words were clear, formal, but deliberate, each one carrying weight. "I'm here to discuss standards for safety, compliance, and fairness in enforcement." A murmur ran through the room. Naomi noticed Daniel's stiff posture, a flicker of confusion crossing his face as he processed her role. She continued, eyes locking briefly on him. "Every driver, every vehicle, every officer tasked with oversight is subject to these standards. This includes interactions during traffic stops. Accountability is not optional, it is mandated." Daniel shifted in his chair, clearing his throat awkwardly. Naomi didn't let him distract her. "It's imperative that compliance with city regulations is consistent, unbiased, and transparent. The public trusts us to enforce rules fairly. Any deviation from these expectations will be scrutinized and addressed." Council members nodded, flipping through reports, unaware of the silent drama unfolding between Naomi and the officer. Daniel's fingers tightened around his pen, a small, futile attempt at control. "You understand, Officer Daniels, that any complaints filed will be thoroughly investigated," Naomi said, projecting her authority without raising her voice. The council chamber felt smaller now, the room vibrating with unspoken tension. "And any officer found violating ethical or legal standards will be held accountable, regardless of tenure or rank," a colleague whispered to Daniels, pointing subtly in Naomi's direction. His jaw tightened, lips pressed together, as if the realization of her authority was a physical blow. Naomi's heart beat faster, but she maintained composure, letting the silent power shift settle. "Is there anyone here today wishing to submit testimony regarding enforcement practices?" the chairwoman asked. Hands rose, and voices spoke over one another. Naomi listened attentively, recording details, making mental notes. She allowed herself a small internal smile. The system she navigated was finally bending under the weight of truth. Daniels fidgeted, attempting to interject, but Naomi's presence rendered him hesitant. His authority, assumed and unchallenged for years, was now undermined not by confrontation, but by undeniable structural reality. He was suddenly just another officer in a room of accountability. "Transparency and integrity are non-negotiable," Naomi added, eyes sweeping the chamber. "No one is above scrutiny. Every interaction, every decision, is recorded and subject to review." Her tone was calm, yet every word landed like a hammer, reshaping the room's hierarchy in real time. A council member leaned forward. "Ms. Rivers, are you suggesting past complaints may not have been handled correctly?" Naomi nodded, subtle but firm. "It's not a suggestion. Historical patterns show discrepancies in enforcement and accountability. My office is committed to rectifying this." Daniel's face reddened slightly. He opened his mouth, hesitated, then closed it. The words he wanted to say, the deflections, the denials, caught in his throat. Naomi's quiet authority had stripped him bare, and the council, the public, the very bureaucracy, reinforced her position. The hearing continued with Naomi presenting reports, policies, and recommendations, all while maintaining a calm, watchful eye on Daniels. He avoided direct confrontation, but his tension was palpable. Naomi's presence, composed yet commanding, shifted the dynamic of the room, silently asserting her power without a single raised voice. When the session ended, Naomi gathered her papers and prepared to leave. Council members approached with nods, whispers of approval, and subtle questions about implementing her recommendations. Outside, sunlight broke through lingering clouds, glinting on wet streets. She stepped into the city, rain-washed, renewed, the weight of confrontation behind her, but the momentum of justice building ahead. In the distance, Daniels lingered near the parking lot, glancing at her with a mixture of disbelief and frustration. Naomi caught his eye briefly. No words passed between them, but the unspoken understanding was clear. The balance of power had shifted. She exhaled slowly, feeling the tight coil of tension unwind just slightly. The public exposure was only the first step, but it had sent a ripple through the system. And Naomi knew, once the ripple became a wave, there would be no turning back. The city hummed around her, indifferent yet electric, and Naomi walked forward, ready to meet it head-on. She was no longer just a target. She was oversight, authority, and a quiet, relentless force for accountability. The rain had stopped, but the streets still glistened like wet glass under the afternoon sun. Naomi Rivers adjusted the strap of her purse as she walked into the city transport office, a stack of reports under her arm. She could feel the pulse of the building, the quiet hum of bureaucracy, the subtle hierarchy of power in every office, every whisper, every glance. And there he was, Officer Daniels, standing near the reception desk, badge gleaming, uniform crisp, posture stiff. The same man who had humiliated her the night before the rain-soaked streets had witnessed his arrogance. And yet, now, in this controlled environment, Naomi held the authority. "Good afternoon, Officer Daniels," she said, voice calm but firm, carrying a weight he had not anticipated. Daniels straightened, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "Ms. Rivers, I didn't expect to see you here," he said, words faltering slightly. Naomi's eyes didn't waver. "I manage transport licensing in the city, officer. That includes all drivers, all vehicles, and all officers responsible for oversight during stops, including you." He swallowed, attempting a chuckle that fell flat. "I see. Well, You were just..." Naomi prompted, tilting her head slightly, letting the silence stretch. "Officer Daniels, last week you pulled a driver and me over, threatened us, and implied that my presence on the street could be controlled by your discretion. Do you remember that?" Daniels' jaw tightened. "I was performing my duty." Naomi exhaled slowly, letting the words hang like a scalpel. Threatening a citizen, particularly based on assumptions about race or gender, is not duty. It is abuse of power, and it is subject to review whether or not you recognize it as such. He glanced toward the receptionist, hoping for an ally. There was none. Naomi's authority was quiet but undeniable, structural as well as personal. He started again, then paused. His usual confidence faltered. Naomi noticed the micro-expressions, the tightening of his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed nervously on his belt, the subtle avoidance of her gaze. "Your report to Internal Affairs painted a different picture," Naomi continued, laying her documents on the counter. "You described me as uncooperative. You failed to mention the threats, the intimidation. This is not a minor discrepancy. It is a serious misrepresentation of facts." Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. I don't recall it that way." Naomi leaned slightly closer, maintaining calm dominance. "Denial doesn't erase the record, officer. The taxi driver remembers. The pedestrian outside remembers. And my office has documentation, including dashcam footage from the cab, which contradict your account." He exhaled sharply, an involuntary admission of vulnerability. Naomi's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, compassion tempered by authority. But she didn't flinch. "Officer Daniels," she said, voice steady, "your conduct has consequences. You are accountable not only to your department, but to the public you serve. The assumption that your badge gives you unchecked power ends here. Do you understand?" "Yes," Daniels muttered, though the word was tentative, lacking conviction. Naomi pressed on. I am initiating a formal review, including recommendations for retraining, disciplinary action, and oversight adjustments. This is not personal. It is systemic. Your actions are part of a larger pattern, and patterns must be corrected. He shifted his weight, glancing around the office as if seeking support, any lifeline. There was none. You may speak, but know that empty words will not change reality, Naomi said. Her tone was calm, deliberate. Accountability is not optional. The public expects fairness. The law demands fairness. And I enforce it. Daniels swallowed again, eyes flicking to the papers she had laid on the counter. Each one a quiet hammer striking against his presumed impunity. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The word stuck somewhere between denial and acceptance. Do you realize? Naomi continued, voice lowering slightly but maintaining its measured cadence, that when you assume power over me, over that driver, over anyone you deem lesser, you reinforce a system of injustice? Every threat, every insinuation, every microaggression contributes to distrust, fear, and trauma in the communities you serve. Daniel's hand twitched involuntarily, a small, human signal of vulnerability. Naomi noted it, as precise as any officer noting non-compliance in the field. But she did not exploit it. She observed. She documented. She enforced. I understand, he said finally, voice quiet. I see now that my actions... Yes, Naomi said, allowing a small pause, letting her authority resonate without raising her voice. You see. And seeing is the first step toward accountability. But recognition without action is meaningless. The next steps are formal and unavoidable. He nodded, chin tight, eyes avoiding hers now completely. Naomi could feel the shift. His assumed dominance had collapsed, replaced by a tentative, grudging awareness of consequence. Good, she said softly. I expect your full cooperation during the review. Anything less will be noted and escalated. This is not a negotiation. It is expectation. And enforcement is non-negotiable. He straightened, shoulders tense, lips pressed together. Understood, he muttered. Naomi gathered her documents, neatly stacking them, her calm authority unwavering. The office seemed smaller now, charged with the residue of confrontation. Daniels lingered for a moment, watching her, perhaps realizing that the balance of power had irreversibly shifted. Before she left, Naomi added quietly, almost to herself, powers earned, Officer Daniels. Not assumed, not taken, earned. The words hung in the air, heavy and precise, and Daniels flinched almost imperceptibly. Naomi's gaze swept the room one last time, ensuring every eye caught the quiet truth. Authority wielded recklessly has limits, and justice, though slow, always finds its way. Outside, sunlight glinted on the wet streets, city noise returning in a low hum. Naomi walked with purpose, heels clicking against the concrete. Every step carried the weight of justice, of resilience, of a woman who refused to be intimidated, who refused to be defined by fear. Daniels remained behind, silent, processing the confrontation, the reality of accountability settling over him like a cold, inescapable rain. Naomi didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had already won, at least in this moment, and the system, at last, had begun to catch up. Officer Daniels sat in the break room of the police precinct, coffee cup trembling in his hand. The hum of fluorescent lights above seemed unusually harsh, reflecting off the sterile linoleum floors. Around him, colleagues chatted casually about mundane details, traffic tickets, upcoming shifts, but none approached him. Rumors had begun to ripple through the precinct. Subtle at first, a faint undercurrent of whispers. You heard about the hearing yesterday? One officer asked another, nodding toward Daniels without meeting his eyes. Daniels' jaw tightened. He took a slow sip of coffee, careful to keep his voice even. Yes. What about it? Nothing. Just word is Rivers really laid it out. Full authority, accountability, the works. The officer said quietly, glancing toward him. Some folks are saying it's a big deal. Daniel's fingers flexed around the mug. Rivers, yes. I'm aware. He wasn't aware of the magnitude yet. Not how quickly his supposed control was slipping, how quietly the precinct had begun to notice the cracks in his armor. Every interaction he had with other officers was now weighed against the hearing, against Naomi's authority. The system he had relied on to protect his autonomy no longer bent to his will. A young officer approached, hesitant. "Sir, you might want to review your cases for last week. IA is asking for reports from any stops involving you. Just routine." Daniel's knuckles whitened around the mug. "Routine?" he repeated. "They're reviewing everything?" "Yeah." The officer said, eyes downcast. "They mentioned Rivers specifically. Said they're checking patterns." Daniels muttered under his breath, the words bitter. Patterns. They're looking at patterns now. He had relied on assumed dominance, subtle threats, and unchallenged authority for years. Now, the structure he had counted on to shield him from accountability had begun to expose him. Meanwhile, Naomi sat in her office downtown, reviewing reports from a hearing, cross-checking complaints, and organizing follow-ups. Her calm focus contrasted with Daniel's unraveling tension. Every detail, every pattern of abuse was being documented meticulously. Her eyes scanned the documents, annotating inconsistencies, highlighting red flags, and planning the next steps. Her phone buzzed. Marcus' name flashed across the screen. "Morning," she said after picking up. "Naomi." Marcus' voice was sharp but controlled. "I've been hearing things. Daniels, people are talking. It's spreading fast." She exhaled slowly, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Exactly as planned. It's not about humiliation. It's about accountability. Patterns emerge when someone is brave enough to document them. There's a lot of fear in the precinct now," he said. "I think he realizes that he's exposed." Naomi's gaze drifted to the city skyline visible through her office window. Exposed and helpless. That's the point. Authority assumed without checks leads to abuse. When it's documented and enforced, it collapses under its own weight. Back at the precinct, Daniels was trying to regain composure. He called his sergeant. "I need clarity on these reviews. What exactly are they looking at?" The sergeant's tone was neutral but firm. "Sir, Internal Affairs is reviewing complaints and reports. They'll determine any discrepancies, inconsistencies, or violations of protocol. Everyone's accountable. This includes your actions." Daniel's face flushed, and he ran a hand over his hair. "Everyone's accountable except me, apparently." "Sir," the sergeant said, patience thinning, "no one is exempt. If there's a problem, it will be documented and addressed. That's all." Daniels hung up, his chest tight. The isolation pressed against him like a physical weight. Even his peers, those who had once deferred to him, now kept their distance, whispering, glancing at him, waiting for the next misstep. The power he relied on for years had crumbled quietly but irreversibly. Naomi's team had begun cross-referencing past complaints involving Daniels. Each incident revealed subtle but consistent patterns. Unnecessary stops, microaggressions, intimidation tactics, inconsistent reporting. Each one was a thread, and Naomi was weaving them into a clear tapestry of misconduct. "Every officer thinks they can operate outside scrutiny," Naomi said aloud, to no one in particular, tapping a pen against her desk. "They forget that systems exist for a reason. Checks and balances aren't optional. They're inevitable." The city outside hummed with indifferent energy, but within her office, control and order reigned. Every report, every testimony, every documented stop added to the foundation of accountability. Naomi knew the importance of precision. One mistake could give Daniels leverage. One oversight could protect the very system she was challenging. Back in the precinct, Daniels received another call, this one from HR. "We're reviewing your files and recent complaints," the voice said flatly. "Expect follow-ups and interviews with colleagues. All actions will be documented." Daniels exhaled sharply, a mixture of fear and frustration. The realization struck him fully. His reputation was unraveling, not through confrontation, but through systematic accountability. Each thread Naomi pulled revealed him further, exposing the assumptions, the abuse, the arrogance. He sank into his chair, coffee long cold, staring at the walls of the break room. The whispers, the glances, the subtle isolation, they all converged into a silent verdict. Authority, assumed recklessly, does not withstand scrutiny. Naomi, meanwhile, prepared her next moves. She scheduled meetings, drafted memos, and reviewed footage from previous complaints. Every action was deliberate, measured, legal, and unassailable. The officer who had once threatened her under the neon rain now faced a system meticulously calibrated to enforce justice. By the end of the day, Daniel's colleagues avoided his gaze. HR had scheduled multiple follow-ups, and Internal Affairs had flagged his file for immediate review. Naomi, standing by her office window, watched the city glow with sunset reflections. There was no triumph in her chest, only a quiet satisfaction. The system was beginning to do its work. Power, when assumed without accountability, unravels under the weight of documentation, evidence, and truth, and Naomi Rivers intended to ensure it did so completely. The council chamber was packed. Media cameras lined the walls, their red recording lights glowing like watchful eyes. Naomi Rivers adjusted her blazer and approached the podium, the stack of reports in her hands feeling heavier than their weight in paper. Today wasn't just a hearing. It was a culmination of weeks of documentation, investigation, and unwavering persistence. Today, Officer Daniel's actions would face the public eye. He sat to the side, uniform impeccable but posture rigid, eyes darting nervously between Naomi, the council, and the cameras. The man who had once assumed unquestioned authority now seemed like a small figure, diminished under the weight of scrutiny. The chairwoman cleared her throat. "We are convened today to review complaints filed against Officer Daniels. Ms. Rivers will present findings." Naomi's voice was steady, measured, but carried the gravity of accountability. "Thank you, Chairwoman. I am Naomi Rivers, Transportation Licensing Oversight. My office has reviewed complaints, cross-referenced reports, and conducted an extensive review of Officer Daniels' enforcement practices." She paused briefly, letting the room absorb the weight of her presence. The findings indicate repeated instances of harassment, intimidation, and misuse of authority. These are not isolated incidents. They represent a pattern of conduct inconsistent with the ethical and legal standard expected of all officers. Daniels shifted, attempting to maintain composure, but the cameras and council members left no room for illusion. Naomi clicked through presentation, each slide documenting a stop, each photo, each recorded statement, each instance of intimidation. "Here," she said, pointing to a dashcam screenshot, "is a nighttime stop of a black female taxi driver. Officer Daniels threatened her verbally, insinuating that her presence on the street could be controlled at his discretion. This is corroborated by the driver's testimony, pedestrian accounts, and cab footage." Gasps echoed quietly through the chamber. Daniel's hand twitched slightly, a micro-expression of shame or denial, or perhaps both. "Further," Naomi continued, voice unwavering, "our review of Internal Affairs records shows repeated complaints against Officer Daniels over the past 3 years. Many were dismissed without follow-up, but patterns emerge when viewed collectively. Each complaint details intimidation tactics, selective enforcement, and bias, subtle yet clear. Patterns of behavior cannot be ignored simply because each incident alone may appear minor." Daniels opened his mouth, a protest forming, but Naomi's gaze, steady, calm, authoritative, froze him. She let the silence stretch for a heartbeat, then moved on. The community expects fairness. The law demands fairness. Authority assumed without accountability breeds fear, mistrust, and trauma. It is my responsibility to ensure that the public's trust is maintained and that every officer, including Officer Daniels, is held to these standards. A council member leaned forward. "Ms. Rivers, what are your recommendations?" Naomi's voice remained measured but firm. "Immediate disciplinary review, mandatory retraining on bias and enforcement ethics, and monitoring of future stops for a minimum of 12 months. Additionally, all complaints previously dismissed should be re-examined for validity and corrective action implemented where necessary." Daniel's lips pressed together, his usual deflection tactics failing under the weight of evidence and public scrutiny. The cameras captured every twitch, every falter, every shift in posture. He relied on assumptions, hierarchy, and fear for years. Now none of that shielded him. A reporter raised a hand. "Ms. Rivers, what message do you hope this sends?" Naomi's eyes swept the room. That authority comes with responsibility. That power without accountability is not tolerated, and that systemic patterns of abuse will be exposed, corrected, and documented. The message is clear. Misconduct has consequences, no matter the badge, no matter the rank, no matter the assumed dominance. The chamber was silent. Daniel's colleagues shifted in their seats, some avoiding eye contact, others whispering quietly, aware of the structural shift happening before them. Finally, Daniel spoke, voice tight. I understand the findings. I will comply with the recommendations. Naomi's gaze softened fractionally, measured compassion in the midst of authority. Acknowledgement is only the first step. Actions, consistency, and accountability will define whether your understanding is genuine or performative. Daniels nodded, chin tight. He looked smaller somehow. Not because of humiliation alone, but because truth, documentation, and public scrutiny have a way of reducing unchecked power to mere human responsibility. After the hearing, Naomi walked through the media corridor outside the chamber. Cameras clicked, microphones were thrust toward her, and questions fired rapidly. Ms. Rivers, do you feel justice has been served? Justice, Naomi said, voice calm, resolute, is a process, not a moment. What we've done today is a step toward accountability, but the work continues. The system works when we are vigilant, when evidence is documented, when oversight is enforced. That is what matters, not a single confrontation, but the ongoing enforcement of fairness and ethics. A young activist approached, shaking Naomi's hand. Thank you for doing this, for not letting it slide. Naomi smiled faintly. It's not just me. It's the system, and it's the people who insist on its integrity. But yes, persistence matters. Courage matters. Back inside the council chamber, Daniels was escorted to a side office for a formal briefing on the disciplinary review. He sat in silence, coffee long gone cold, the gravity of the public reckoning settling on him like a lead weight. Each slide Naomi had presented, every piece of documentation, every corroborated account. He had seen them all. And there was no deflection, no hierarchy, no badge that could erase the evidence. Outside, Naomi walked to the parking garage, the city lights reflecting off the wet streets. Her phone buzzed, a message from Marcus. Well done. She typed back simply, it's not done yet, but we started the process. That counts. Her mind, as always, was already strategizing the next steps, monitoring compliance, ensuring that retraining was implemented, tracking follow-up complaints. Justice wasn't a single event. It was sustained accountability. The city hummed around her, indifferent, yet subtly altered. She had faced the system, exposed its flaws, and used it to correct injustice. Daniel's reputation, carefully built over years of assumed dominance, had begun to crumble. But Naomi knew the emotional cost was real. The tension, the fear, the constant vigilance. Even in victory, there was weight. She paused on the steps of the parking garage, inhaling the crisp evening air. The reflection of neon signs shimmered in puddles, distorted and fragmented, much like the fractured power Daniels had once wielded with confidence. Naomi felt a quiet satisfaction, tempered with awareness. True change required persistence, courage, and resilience. As she slid into her taxi and started the engine, she allowed herself a brief, private exhale. The public reckoning had begun, and for the first time, the balance of power was being restored, measured, deliberate, undeniable. And Naomi Rivers would ensure it stayed that way. The morning sun slanted across the city, turning wet streets into rivers of gold and silver. Naomi Rivers sat at her office desk, the soft hum of fluorescent lights mingling with the faint chatter of her team. Today's schedule was lighter, but her mind buzzed with the weight of the previous weeks. The hearings, the documentation, the public exposure. Daniel's fate was no longer abstract. The system she had painstakingly navigated was closing in. The phone rang. It was the Internal Affairs liaison. Ms. Rivers, the voice said, firm but tinged with admiration. The review is complete. Officer Daniels' file has been updated, disciplinary actions confirmed, and he will be reassigned pending retraining. Further complaints will be closely monitored. Naomi let the words sink in. Thank you, she said softly. Relief coursed through her, but it was tempered with reflection. Justice had been served, but at what cost? Not to her reputation or authority, but to the emotional toll she carried with every encounter in a system designed to intimidate and dismiss. Meanwhile, Daniels was at the precinct, reading the formal letter confirming the consequences of his actions. Mandatory retraining, public reprimand, close monitoring. His tenure, carefully curated over years of assumed dominance, felt suddenly fragile, exposed under the unyielding lens of oversight. A young officer nearby cleared her throat. "Sir, everyone's aware now." Words spreading fast. Folks are talking. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Yes, I am aware." He stared at the letter again, the implications settling like a weight in his chest. Every unjust stop, every microaggression, every subtle intimidation now stood documented and undeniable. The system he had relied on for protection now held him accountable in full. Across town, Naomi met with a taxi driver whose ordeal had sparked a chain of exposure. "I want you to know," she said, voice calm but resolute. "Your testimony mattered. Every word you shared reinforced accountability. Systems work when people speak the truth." The driver nodded, eyes bright with gratitude. "Thank you, Naomi. I didn't think anyone would listen. I thought it was just me, another target. But you made sure someone did something." Naomi smiled faintly, a mixture of warmth and the weight of responsibility. It's never just about one person. It's about ensuring fairness for everyone. Back at the precinct, Daniels attempted to maintain his composure. He sat alone in the break room. Coffee long gone cold, the murmurs of colleagues faintly audible through the walls. He reflected on each stop, each interaction, each moment he had assumed control, believing his authority unchallengeable. Now, he understood authority without accountability was a fragile illusion. A senior officer approached him cautiously. "Daniels, just make sure you cooperate fully. Training, reports, follow-ups. It's the only way to rebuild credibility." Daniels nodded mutely. Words stuck somewhere between humility, frustration, and fear. The balance of power had shifted. Quietly, irreversibly. Naomi, meanwhile, prepared for a final meeting with the council, ensuring all corrective measures were documented and monitored. She reviewed timelines, cross-checked reports, and planned for the oversight that would prevent future abuses. Each action, each decision, was deliberate, a guarantee that Daniel's reckoning wasn't an isolated event, but a systemic correction. When the council convened, Naomi presented the final report. Officer Daniel's disciplinary action has been implemented, retraining scheduled, and ongoing monitoring established. This is a model for accountability, not just for him, but for all officers entrusted with authority. Justice is not punitive alone. It is corrective, systemic, and sustained. The council members nodded, some murmuring quietly. The city's media captured the moment, the cameras recording not confrontation, but structured, measured accountability. Naomi's authority radiated through calm expertise rather than confrontation. Her quiet composure a testament to systemic enforcement rather than individual retribution. Outside, Daniels lingered in the parking lot, the sun glinting off his uniform. He had faced public scrutiny, formal consequences, and the collapse of unearned authority. For the first time in years, he felt small, not humiliated, but aware of the limitations of power when untempered by ethics and accountability. Naomi passed him, heels clicking sharply on concrete. Their eyes met briefly. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The system had spoken. The balance was restored. In the quiet moments that followed, Naomi allowed herself to reflect on the emotional toll. The stress, fear, and vigilance she had carried through each encounter had left marks. Surviving systemic intimidation wasn't merely about patience. It was about resilience, strategy, and unwavering self-possession. And yet, despite the cost, she felt a quiet pride. She had navigated bureaucracy, public scrutiny, and the weight of systemic injustice, and achieved measurable change. Later, Marcus called. "So, how does it feel?" Naomi exhaled, leaning back in her chair. Relief, mostly, but also aware. The city is still the same. The work isn't done. We've set a precedent, but systemic change is ongoing. and I have to be ready to enforce it. He chuckled softly. You make it sound like a battle plan. Maybe it is, she said. Every stop, every complaint, every enforcement action is a chance to ensure fairness. That's the point. That's what real power looks like. Measured, accountable, resilient. Across the city, Daniels was finishing retraining modules, reading manuals, and sitting through discussions on ethics and bias. Each lesson was a quiet reminder. Authority without accountability collapses under the weight of truth. The man who once believed fear and dominance equal control now faced a reality that systems designed to protect the public would not bend for his convenience. Naomi, back at her office, reviewed her calendar, planning the next steps. Oversight meetings, compliance checks, ongoing monitoring. She allowed herself a small, private smile. Justice had been served. Authority had been corrected. And the systemic lessons had been reinforced. Yet the emotional resonance remained. She had endured the fear, the tension, the harassment, and the constant vigilance. Victory was tempered with awareness. The personal cost of systemic battles was never invisible. But for every measure of emotional weight, there was also strength, clarity, and the quiet satisfaction of accountability realized. Stepping out onto the city streets that evening, Naomi inhaled deeply. The sunset glinted off puddles, neon reflections lingering like memories of struggle and triumph. Daniel's shadow had receded. His dominance had collapsed. The city, however, remained the same, vibrant, imperfect, alive. And in that imperfect reality, Naomi Rivers walked forward, a quiet, relentless force for accountability, justice, and ethical authority. Justice, after all, was never instantaneous, never easy. It was systemic, deliberate, and enduring, and Naomi had ensured it prevailed.